Welcome. This is Mad Fig Customs. I'll be covering my process on how to customize Marvel Legend action figures. Today I'll be making a Spider-Woman figure, specifically one of Mattie Franklin's many costumes as Spider-Woman. So for this one, I'll briefly start off by covering the character, but if you want to get straight to the modeling, just go ahead and skip to the first bookmark. Mattie Franklin had her own pretty brief run in the early 2000s, 1999 to early 2000s. She usually dealt with supernatural or demonic threats. Think X-Files and Buffy the Vampire Slayer, because those were kind of at the heart of their popularity at the time. Marvel decided to capitalize off of that and start to expand the cast of the Spider people within the Spider-Man universe with this younger female main character. So Mattie obtained her supernatural powers, which were given to her during a satanic ceremony during which apparently Norman Osborn was driven insane. Not that he wasn't already. Mattie would last about 18 issues before the run ended and would eventually come back into the Spider-Man orbit as a kind of sad, sullen adult in the Alias series. It's pretty dark. It's kind of a stark juxtaposition to the fun, happy character we see in her run. She is unceremoniously sacrificed by the children of Kraven the Hunter. She had supernatural powers, which included flight, psychic spider legs, psychic webs, organic webbing, energy blasts, all the typical spider powers, and a camouflage ability that she can sort of make herself invisible. So she could have easily yeeted these jabronis into oblivion, but hey, sometimes Marvel has to fridge a character or two to motivate one of their main superheroes into a violent act of vengeance. Even with her limited run, Mattie was given a new costume in almost every issue as a kind of inside joke. So in this video, I chose her third costume in the run, which is a predominantly blue suit with red forearms and legs. So let's get into it. For this custom, I will be using the Rogue action figure, came out recently, as well as the head of a Spider-Man Noir. I'm using Rogue specifically because she has a kind of body type that we see for Mattie, and the head is also something that we might actually use because she bears a passing resemblance to Mattie, which is good for us. So you're going to want to start by heating up the whole figure, making sure you get all the joints and removable parts. So do that at a high heat that for a little while, then you can take off the legs and the arms. With the newer figures, I haven't had any trouble when it comes to the popping out of the joints. It's been pretty great, except for the pinless joints for the elbows and the knees. Now, for my process, I use acrylic markers. The brand is called Artugn. Not sure how to pronounce that, but it's A-R-T-U-G-N. And you can find those on Amazon. They come in a 24 pack or a 48 pack. They're pretty cheap. They're great little brushes. They have two nibs, two ends. So you're going to want to start with doing downward strokes. Keep in mind that while you're painting, you want to keep roughly the same orientation of the stroke. So if you're going up and down, try to keep it all up and down. Here I'm going down. I do that because if there's any dust particles or anything, I kind of like take it with me with each stroke. You can sort of push those things down and kind of easily take them off. I don't think we'll have that issue with this figure. And it's gonna give you pretty thin layers of paint. I don't necessarily go in for like popping off the torso and sanding the joints. I don't think you need to with these markers. I don't know if you can see in the video, but there's very little streaking and it covers pretty well. And I'm going to put 2 coats, and usually I'll put 2 or 3 just to make sure that I don't get too much streaking. And if you have a base color that's quite dark, you don't want those colors showing through. And just to make sure that you get, a good first layer going, because everything that's blue in the suit is going to get at least 2 coats. Just make sure you cover everything that it needs to be this color. Our next step here is we're going to use some Krylon. I'm going to use something called Krylon Matte Finish. This is an awesome sealer spray. I get mine from a local art store, but you can find it pretty much anywhere art supplies are sold. You want to make sure it's well shaken up inside, good stuff from the bottom of the can. You're really going to want to make sure that you cover absolutely every part of the figure that's been painted. Because the sealer, as the name implies, it seals the color inside, and to make sure that it doesn't rub off when you handle the figure later. Now you're going to want to keep it away from your face. This stuff is pretty toxic. Normally I should be wearing gloves, but I just was too lazy to do that, so I'm not. So I'm just going to spray it directly to the thing. But if you do that on your end, so just wash your hands, absolutely, wash them afterwards. It's not going to burn or anything, but those chemicals, they stay on there. You don't want to end up rubbing your eyes or whatever. So yeah, you cover absolutely every part of the painted portions. Yeah, and go. Now we're going to do the red part of the costume. After the sealer is dried, you can put on a green painter's tape. That's no problem. It's going to stay on and it's not going to take any of the paint off when you take the tape off. Just make sure it's dry before you put the tape. Give it as much time as you can. For the sealer, it really doesn't take that long to dry. It usually takes about an hour and you're good to go. And so we're just going to use this painter's tape and make sure that we can get some nice crisp lines here. Again, I'm going to use my R-Tugged acrylic paint brushes, or acrylic pens, I suppose. And you're going to want to make sure that you keep the same orientation again when it comes to the tape, and just making sure that you're keeping that line crisp. So you can already see that this red color doesn't have the same coverage as the blue, and you can see the streaks there. So we're going to need to put on more than 2 coats. So the marker paint dries pretty quickly, so I'll just go directly into putting a second coat on it. But you're gonna see, even when it does dry, it's gonna get those streaks, so we're gonna put probably 1 or 2 more coats in all, maybe four coats. What's great about these pens is that they're seemingly unending supply of ink, so you can just go at it until you get it right. Now we're gonna do the rest of the pieces. Just make sure they're all well covered up with tape. Make sure you get those crisp lines the way you want them. This is good because they're bigger lines, they're a little bit easier to do, but if you need to do smaller details, there's very thin width painter's tape that'll help you with those. So again, doing the same thing for this one, I've started just kind of like streaking downwards, and I draw downwards over the tape, just because if you go upwards you risk bleeding under the tape, and you don't want that because you're kind of gonna have to redo your line, and that isn't what you want to do. You want to get this pretty well sorted out the first go around, because if you're messing around with redoing lines and things like that, then it's going to take forever and you might not get, the result you want. So again, we're going to do about 2 coats on this one. We're just going to go down the line here. With the brush, you can get into the little nooks and crannies. We're going to do the same thing for the arms. Now the arms have this kind of like upwards kind of line to them that goes from the forearm to the elbow. So you're going to want to kind of get that line accordingly. I started putting tape. I put tape on the painted portions, the already painted blue portions that I did with the sealer, because you don't want to just eyeball it. You want to get it right. You want to make sure you get everything. If you don't want any spaces in your line, I'm just going to use my X-Acto knife here to pat down, kind of make sure that the tape is tightly stuck here. Basically, you just keep going at it until you get the color you want. The legs I've let dry, but again, I'm going to be putting a second coat on them, and we're going to start to see the streaks, the dark streaks underneath are starting to disappear, because this is a very thin acrylic paintbrush, a thin layer of paint you get from this. So it's not going to just like layer on, and that's another reason I'm not huge on the airbrush. I know that you can get really, really good results with the airbrush, and people love them, but I'm not that delicate. I just can't get it to do what I want, so it ends up like 4 or 5 layers of acrylic airbrush paint, and it looks kind of clunky. So yeah, that's why I use these brushes. It's easier to make a thin layer. There we go. So here we got a really good, relatively good line going. They're pretty friggin' straight, pretty neat. I like the results. So what I'm gonna do next is I'm going to use this model painting stand with alligator clips. This I got on Amazon pretty cheap. And I'm gonna use the alligator clips here and sort of prop up the pieces. Now, when I get to the spray portion, I can spray the sealer on the whole thing, and I can move this thing around, and I don't have to worry about where I put stuff when I'm waiting for it to dry. So these, I definitely recommend getting a stand like this if you're gonna do painting, if you're gonna do sealing. Super, super useful. If there isn't an area on a piece that you can easily clip, What I do is I use toothpicks and I stick them in a hole until it's tight, clamp those with a clip, and you just put as many as you need to get it tight, and it'll hold up pretty well. With the leg hole here, the rubber nibs at the edge of the clip those are thick enough to fit inside, and that'll keep the leg up. And I'm just going to do that for all the little pieces. Again, toothpicks for the little arms. And now we have a nice little layout. So when we get to the spraying portion, it's going to cover everything. So now back to the spray lab. We're going to just cover it. We want a full layer on there, and we'll just wait till it's dry. Usually you can tell if it's dry just by sight, when it's no longer shiny. And if you touch it, it's not tacky anymore. That's how you know it's dry. And now that I have it in my hands, the paint is not coming off, and we get a nice little line here. And keep in mind, you're going to have to heat these to pop them back onto the torso. So having a good sealant will keep the paint from running. Now you can heat it up, you can do all sorts of things with it. The paint just is going to stay fresh, solid. It's not going to come off. So you can basically pop your limbs back on here. And yeah, so arms are back on, shoulders back in torso, and you get it all put back together. And now we're going to get to the head. So I'm going to use the Spider-Man Noir eyes as the lenses, just because they're kind of easier to take off on this one. They're kind of elevated here. So we're going to want to use pliers for this because heating this up, it's going to get pretty hot and you don't want to burn your fingers. So I just use pliers. You can heat it up as much as you want. And you're going to start by taking off the hat because that's kind of covering the eyes. Now I know the Spider-Man Noir figure came with an alternate head with no hat, but I am fresh out of those heads, so I'm using this one. So I got to pop off the hat here. The Hasbro paint comes off relatively easily once it's heated. There you go, we got a hat. We got a head. Now we're going to take these lenses off. And what I'm going to do is take my trusty Craftsman X-Acto knife, and this might be sacrilege, but we are going to do some irreversible damage to the plastic. We're going to cut the eyes out, which sounds pretty horrific, but it's actually a pretty straightforward process. So we got the eyes popped out now, and then the lenses, which is what we want. So we're going to keep these handy because these will go a long way to achieving that Mattie Franklin look. And I think I'm going to use the rogue head after all. I wasn't initially planning on it, but I do think that she has a good resemblance to the character. Mattie Franklin is always kind of smiling, always seems like she's in a good mood, and kind of got a tricky look on her face. Again, don't forget to use your pliers when you're heating up smaller objects, just so you don't burn your fingers. So we're going to heat her up. Pop off the hair. The fringe comes out relatively easy. We can make use of that for Maddie's hair, possibly. And now, most of the time, if you heat up the hair enough, you can just pop it off pretty easily, kind of like the hat we had there. But for whatever reason, this rogue figure, they use some military-grade adhesive to keep that wig on. So if you're in a bind, what you can do is get your X-Acto knife, and you cut where the head and the hair meet, because sometimes they just fuse together and that's it, you know, we're still getting them apart. So here I was able to get it off, but with some significant damage to the back of that head. Luckily, we'll be covering that up with a nifty new hairpiece. I'm taking this head that I have left over from the X-Force 3-pack with Jubilee, and I'm going to use her hair. I had done another custom with this head, but I didn't like it, so I took it apart, and I think the hair is very reminiscent of Mattie. She has that sort of shorter hairstyle from the 90s. It's quite big on top, kind of like anime style, but we don't have that, and I like this subtler. So we can see it's already coming together. It already kind of looks closer to what we want. Now the heads are different proportions, and we can see that the sideburns are not going to fit in. So what we're going to do is we're going to get the old Dremel out. Now this is your secret weapon. You're going to use it pretty much all the time if you're doing custom figs, so I definitely suggest investing in one. Even like it's just super useful for work around the house. You can do anything with a Dremel, and even if it's not Dremel brand, I had a Temu Dremel which was like $10, but it still worked extremely well. So I Dremeled away the plastic on the hair just to make it fit better, and here we go. I think we have something we can work with. It's looking pretty good. She's looking very much like Mattie Franklin. So now we're going to get out our lenses. I ended up cutting off the little middle part because we want to put them on separately. For that, we're going to use some crazy glue, And we're going to be extremely careful because these are very small parts and you do not want it to glue in a position that you don't like, because it's going to be very hard to get off. And you could damage the figure and easily damage the paint. It happens, but I would suggest trying to get it right the first time. I like to put crazy glue on the tip of these little tweezers here so that I can get into the small crevices. And here we'll do the second eye with crazy glue and tweezers. So it started to stick on my finger, which again you do not want, because if it starts sticking, the paint will come off, but we got lucky. So we're going to tamp it down with the tweezers, the part that didn't have glue on it, and then we're going to make sure to get the little crevices in there. So we got a relatively good facsimile here of Mattie Franklin, with lenses, with the hair, with the lipstick, all that stuff. And because in the comics, the mask has got this sort of blue edge to it, I'm going to try something here that I may end up not using. I'm going to paint the rims of the mask blue and part of the upper face, just to kind of match what we have going in the comics. Here I got some paint on the nose, so what you can do if you get paint in a place you don't want it, you can use a very small version of the Dremel. This I got on Amazon, where I have these, which are smaller, thinner files. You can get that. I got these off of a Gundam modeling kit, and just sort of trim away the paint. And I kind of just very slowly, very gently Dremel away the paint, and eventually it comes off. You don't want the blue ink again, so it's tough. You don't want to paint the faces usually. You want to stay away from those unless it's going to be like one full color, just because the new Marvel Legend faces, the sculpts are really, really good, and the paint jobs are really, really good, and just like, you know, a random touch of paint could end up ruining it, and you don't want that. I've seen some really, really good customs which are amazing from people who have 3D printers and like airbrushes and all this, but I'm not going to be using those, so you gotta be careful. Just make sure you don't get any paint on the face. So yeah, so far pretty good. I didn't film this part because there was a lot of trial and error involved, but with a very tiny red pen, I think it was like a point something millimeter, tiny, I drew on the spider chest emblem. And because the suit in the comics had those web wings, I dremeled the slot into the arms and reused some old Jessica Drew Spider-Woman web wings. And now I'll put it all together. I like what we got. It looks good. So here she is with 2 other Mattie costumes I've done previously. There you go. That's my process. There's Mattie Franklin. So if you like this video, drop a like or comment or whatever people do to YouTube videos. This is my first video on this channel, possibly my only one, I don't know. If ever it strikes me to do more of these, that'd be great. Or if the feedback that I get is that I'm doing everything absolutely completely wrong, then maybe I'll just do it on my own time and keep it private. So, you know, if you have anything you'd like to share, tips or tricks that you want to put in the comments, go for that. Any questions, please ask me. All right, I'll see you guys next time.